Thank you so much for talking to us. This is a slightly peculiar, unusual way of doing an interview.
Behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace, a revelation is said to have surfaced that few ever expected to hear. According to reports circulating quietly among royal watchers, King Charles III may have uncovered a sealed clause hidden deep within his late mother's final estate documents. A clause so carefully concealed, so deliberately timed, that it wasn't meant to be found until years after her passing, and at the center of it all was the one name that continues to divide the monarchy. Prince Harry. The discovery allegedly happened during what was supposed to be a routine internal review. Sources claim Charles requested a comprehensive reassessment of Queen Elizabeth II's private estate. Not out of suspicion, but protocol. Years had passed since her death, and unfinished legal threads needed to be tied. Advisors expected paperwork. Instead, they've reportedly found something else entirely. A sealed addendum, handwritten, dated just months before the Queen's death. And once it was opened, the atmosphere in the room reportedly shifted. Those familiar with the situation say, Charles recognized the handwriting instantly. It wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't symbolic. It was personal. The writing, described as shakier than in earlier years but unmistakably deliberate, carried instructions that contradicted everything he believed he knew about his mother's final wishes. What stunned advisors wasn't just the existence of the clause but who it focused on and what it demanded. According to reports, the clause outlined a significant inheritance earmarked for Harry. Not ceremonial assets, not sentimental heirlooms, but a substantial financial provision drawn from the Queen's private estate. Yet this wasn't a gift freely given. It came with conditions. And those conditions, insiders claim, were designed to do something far more strategic than provide money. They were meant to pull Harry back into the orbit of the family he walked away from. One requirement allegedly stood out immediately. To access the full inheritance, Harry would need to maintain an ongoing physical connection to the UK and the Commonwealth. Not as a working royal, not as a public figure bound by palace rules, but as a presence. Reports suggest the clause required him to spend a minimum amount of time each year on British or Commonwealth soil. Involved in causes aligned with the values the Queen spent her life defending, it wasn't about titles. It was about proximity. But that was only the beginning. Another portion of the clause reportedly focused on Harry's children. Funds were allegedly set aside for their future education, upbringing, long-term security, yet even here, the Queen's hand was firm. The money, according to speculation, would be overseen by trustees approved not just by Harry, but by the reigning monarch as well. More importantly, the clause reportedly expressed the Queen's wish that her great-grandchildren not grow up disconnected from their British heritage, that they would know the land, the family, and the history they were born into. Those who claim to have knowledge of the document say the most emotional part wasn't legal at all. Attached to the clause was reportedly a private letter addressed to Charles, not written as a queen, but as a mother. In it, she allegedly acknowledged the fractures within the family, the anger, the disappointment, the sense of betrayal, but she also made one thing clear. Harry was still her grandson, and she wasn't willing to leave this world without trying one last time to keep him from drifting away completely. That letter, insiders say, placed Charles in an impossible position. As king, he is expected to protect the monarchy from instability. As a son, he was staring at his mother's final request, not a command, a plea. Honor the framework she created. Give Harry the choice she never could force during her lifetime, and accept whatever outcome followed. Behind the scenes, reactions were reportedly divided. Some advisors urged immediate compliance, warning that ignoring the Queen's final wishes could fracture trust within the institution. Others cautioned restraint, pointing out how easily such a move could be framed as weakness. As rewarding someone who had publicly criticized the family and profited from those criticisms, the inheritance, they warned, could become another headline weapon. Then there was the issue of Prince William. Sources claim William's response was far less forgiving. From his perspective, reopening doors Harry had already slammed shut, risked destabilizing everything he was preparing to inherit. The wounds between the brothers, once inseparable, were deep. Trust had eroded beyond public repair. Reports suggest William viewed the clause not as reconciliation, but but manipulation and attempt to force unity through obligation rather than accountability. And yet, Charles hesitated. Those close to him say he couldn't shake the sense that his mother had seen something he hadn't, that she understood time was running out, that this clause wasn't about money or control or image, but about leaving behind one final bridge instead of another, burned one. 3,000 miles away, Harry allegedly had no idea any of this existed. His life in California had settled into a demanding but controlled rhythm. Media projects, speaking engagements, private family life, financially secure, but not untouchable, and emotionally, still deeply scarred by everything he believed the institution had taken from him. If the reports are accurate, accepting the inheritance would require Harry to do the very thing he and Meghan Markle worked to avoid, returning regularly to the environment they say caused so much damage: the press, the scrutiny, the memories, and more than that, it would mean allowing the monarchy a presence, however indirect, in his children's future. Yet rejecting it outright would come with its own cost. Turning down his grandmother's final provision could be seen as final, permanent, a closing door that might never reopen. And for a man who has spoken so often about generational pain, the question would linger: what legacy would that choice leave behind? Royal insiders suggest negotiations may be inevitable, adjustments, clarifications, quiet legal back and forth behind closed doors. A compromise that technically honors the Queen's wishes without reigniting open conflict. But there's also a darker possibility, that the clause itself becomes another battlefield, another symbol of control, another reason for resentment to grow. What makes this story linger isn't the money. By royal standards, the sums involved are modest. What matters is what the clause represents. A queen who, even in her final months, was still thinking several moves ahead, still trying to protect her family from itself, still unwilling to accept that some breaks are beyond repair. Whether the reports are entirely accurate or partially exaggerated, one thing is clear. The legacy of House of Windsor is no longer just about crowns and ceremonies. It's about unresolved relationships, about whether tradition can survive fracture, and about whether a grandmother's final attempt to hold her family together will be honored or quietly set aside. The clock, as insiders say, is ticking. Decisions will have to be made. Lines will be drawn or crossed, and somewhere between duty and forgiveness, the future of the monarchy hangs, waiting to see whether this hidden clause becomes a turning point or just another chapter in a family that never quite found its way back to one another. What makes the situation even more volatile is what happens after the clause is revealed. According to speculation among royal observers, King Charles wouldn't be able to simply file it away or quietly ignore it. The moment legal notification is issued, the clock starts. Procedures activate. Timelines are triggered. And suddenly, a deeply private family matter becomes something that could spill into public view, whether anyone wants it to or not. Reports suggest Charles's advisors pushed for a two-track approach. One formal, one personal. The formal route would involve Harry's legal team receiving official notice of the inheritance and its conditions, laid out in language that leaves little room for ambiguity. No emotion, no commentary, just facts. The personal route, however, is where things become far more delicate. Insiders claim Charles considered writing directly to Harry, not as king, but as a father, acknowledging the clause, explaining that it was his mother's final wish, and making it clear that the choice ahead was Harry's alone. That letter, sources say, would be carefully worded. No pressure, no guilt, no references to past conflicts. Just an opening, a door left unlocked, not pushed open. Charles, according to those close to him, understands that forcing reconciliation would only guarantee failure. The Queen's framework only works if Harry chooses to step into it willingly. But even that gesture carries risk. If Harry were to accept the inheritance outright, the public narrative could shift overnight. Some would frame it as a homecoming, a sign that wounds were finally beginning to heal. Others would accuse the monarchy of dangling money to regain control, of using a dead queen's wishes to pull a wayward son back into line. Every move would be dissected, every word scrutinized, and every silence interpreted as strategy. If Harry rejected it, the fallout could be just as intense. Turning down a grandmother's final provision would harden perceptions on both sides. Supporters might praise him for standing his ground and protecting his family's independence. Critics would say he proved once and for all that reconciliation was never his goal, that he wanted distance, not peace. In either case, the rejection would feel final in a way. Few family decisions ever do. There's also a third path, one that many believe is the most likely. Negotiation. Royal analysts suggest Harry's lawyers would, as Archie Mountbatten-Windsor and Lilibet Mountbatten-Windsor grow older. Questions Harry has managed to postpone will become unavoidable. Where do they belong? What do they inherit besides wealth? And will they one day ask why an entire side of their family exists only in photographs and headlines? Those who understand the Queen's mindset believe this is exactly what she was trying to prevent. Not conflict between adults that was already inevitable, but permanent estrangement for the next generation. Her clause, according to those reports, wasn't about forcing Harry to return. It was about making sure the door stayed open long enough for the children to decide for themselves one day. Still, nothing guarantees that outcome. The most uncomfortable possibility is that the clause does exactly what it was meant to avoid, that it becomes another symbol of control, another source of resentment, another moment where intentions are lost beneath years of unresolved pain. If Harry were to accept the inheritance and later speak publicly about feeling constrained or manipulated by its conditions, the damage could be severe. The Queen's final attempt at unity could be reframed as pressure, as leverage, as proof that the monarchy never truly lets go. And for Charles, that risk weighs heavily. This is not just about Harry, it's about what kind of reign he wants to lead. One defined by continuity and compassion, or one marked by firm boundaries and consequences. His mother ruled by patience and subtlety, but she also ruled in a different era, one where family disputes didn't play out across streaming platforms and social media. Whatever choice Charles makes will ripple outward, through William, through the public, through the institution itself, and perhaps most importantly, through history. Monarchs are remembered not only for what they preserved, but for what they failed to heal. The clause is no longer hidden. That much is certain. Whether it becomes a bridge, a breaking point, or something messier in between depends on decisions that haven't yet been made, conversations that haven't yet happened, and emotions that are still raw, unresolved, and dangerously close to the surface. For now, everything remains suspended. Between London and California, between duty and distance, between a grandmother's final hope and a family still unsure whether it knows how to come back together. And until someone makes the first irreversible move, the future of the royal family doesn't rest on a crown or a throne, but on whether anyone is willing to take that step forward, knowing it could hurt just as much as walking away. What few people talk about is how fragile this moment actually is. According to those familiar with royal dynamics, situations like this don't usually explode all at once. They rot quietly. One delayed response, one poorly worded letter, one leak to the press. That's all it takes for a potential turning point to collapse into another permanent fracture. Insider suggests Charles understands this better than anyone. He has lived his entire life inside the consequences of timing. Too early, and you look impulsive. Too late, and the moment is gone. His fear, reportedly, isn't that Harry will reject the clause. It's that Harry will do nothing at all. No acceptance, no refusal, just silence. And silence, in royal terms, can be louder than outright defiance. If that happens, the inheritance becomes suspended in limbo. Not activated, not withdrawn, just sitting there, an unresolved gesture frozen in time. A reminder of a mother's last attempt, slowly losing relevance as years pass and children grow older without connection. That, some say, would be the cruelest outcome of all. There's also the question no one in the palace can fully control. Leaks. Even if every legal step is handled privately, even if correspondence remains confidential, stories like this have a way of surfacing. A whisper to a journalist, a hint dropped by a source close to the family. Once the idea of a hidden clause enters public conversation, speculation fills the gaps faster than facts ever could. And speculation is dangerous, because it doesn't just rewrite motives, it rewrites character. Charles becomes either the cold king enforcing his mother's will, or the weak father bending under it. Harry becomes either the prodigal son, tempted by money, or the wounded exile, refusing control. William becomes either the protector of the institution, or the unforgiving brother blocking reconciliation. None of these narratives are fully true, but once they take hold, they're almost impossible to dislodge. What's especially striking is how much of this hinges on children who are too young to understand any of it. Decisions being made now will shape how they view their family years from now. Whether they grow up seeing the monarchy as something that rejected their parents or something their parents chose to walk away from, that perspective will matter when they're old enough to ask questions no PR statement can answer. The Queen, according to those who studied her closely, always thought in generational terms. Not elections, not headlines, lifetimes. Her hidden clause fits that pattern perfectly. It wasn't designed to fix the present. It was designed to prevent regret in the future, to make sure that when her great-grandchildren one day ask why things fell apart, no one has to say, "We didn't even try." And that may be the real weight of what Charles is carrying. This isn't just an inheritance. It's a mirror, one that forces every person involved to confront their own limits. How much pride are they willing to sacrifice? How much pain are they willing to risk reopening? And how much control are they willing to give up for the possibility, no guarantee, of something better? Because reconciliation, if it comes at all, won't arrive as a dramatic reunion or a public apology. It will be slow, awkward, uncomfortable, built from small decisions made far away from cameras. And it may never look the way the Queen hoped it would. But even an imperfect bridge is still a bridge. The hidden clause has already done one thing no one expected. It has forced movement, forced thought, forced the family to confront a future they've been avoiding. Whether that movement leads forward or collapses under the weight of history is still unknown. What is known is this: moments like this don't come twice. Once the window closes, it rarely reopens. And somewhere between loyalty and loss, a family that has survived wars, scandals, and centuries of change now faces one of its most personal tests yet. Not in public, not on a balcony, but in private decisions made behind closed doors, where crowns don't protect you and titles don't tell you what the right choice is. Only time will reveal whether this final move from beyond the grave becomes a quiet turning point, or the last unanswered message in a story that never quite found its ending. And even as everything appears frozen, pressure continues to build beneath the surface. Royal historians often point out that the monarchy doesn't usually collapse under scandal-lit strains, under unresolved tension. And this situation, if the reports are even partially accurate, is tension at its most dangerous. Not loud, not dramatic, just quietly persistent. Those close to the palace claim Charles has delayed any outward movement for one reason above all else: control of the narrative. Once Harry is formally informed, events stop being theoretical. Lawyers get involved, deadlines appear, and the story gains momentum that no one, not even a king, can fully slow down. For a man who waited decades to inherit the crown, rushing into a decision that could define his reign feels like a risk he isn't ready to take lightly. At the same time, doing nothing carries its own consequences. The longer the clause remains undisclosed to Harry, the more it transforms from a gesture of reconciliation into a secret. And secrets, especially in royal families, rarely stay buried. When they surface late, they don't feel like opportunities, they feel like betrayals. Some insiders believe Charles is waiting for the right moment after health concerns subside, after political tensions settle, after the monarchy regains firmer footing. But critics quietly wonder if that moment will ever truly arrive. Family fractures don't heal on a schedule. They heal when someone decides to act despite the risk. Meanwhile, speculation continues to swirl about what Harry would actually do if presented with the choice. Friends of his have suggested he still carries deep respect for his grandmother, and that her voice, even posthumously, would carry emotional weight. Others insist the wounds run too deep, that any offer tied to conditions, no matter how gently framed, would feel like another attempt to pull him back into a system he believes nearly broke him. And then there's Meghan. While her name is rarely mentioned in official palace conversations, everyone understands her influence is unavoidable. Any decision Harry makes would be a family decision. Accepting the clause could reopen old trauma for her. Rejecting it could permanently close doors for their children. Neither path is clean. Neither is free of consequence. This is where the Queen's final move becomes almost unsettling in its precision. She didn't offer certainty. She didn't force forgiveness. she left behind a dilemma, one that requires emotional honesty rather than obedience. A choice that exposes what each person truly values when stripped of public performance. For William, the stakes are different but no less personal. As the future king, stability matters. Predictability matters. A brother re-entering the UK orbit, even conditionally, introduces variables he may not be willing to manage, especially after years spent rebuilding trust with the public while distancing the monarchy from controversy. From his perspective, reopening old wounds risks